I used to believe that family was supposed to be your first home, the one place you could always return to, no matter how far you wandered. But somewhere along the way, my family stopped feeling like that for me. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow, quiet drift that turned into an ocean between us. And by the time I noticed, I was already standing alone on the other shore. I'm 17 now, but the truth is, I can't remember a single time I felt like the world revolved around me in my own house. It always revolved around my sister, Lily. She's 3 years younger than me, and ever since the day she was born, she's been the center of everyone's universe. I can still picture that first night. Or maybe it's just the story I've been told so many times. The beeping of hospital machines, the whispers of worry, and the way my parents' faces went pale every time a nurse walked into the room. Lily was born with complications, a weak heart, fragile lungs, and a list of conditions so long it filled a binder my mother carried everywhere. She was a miracle, they said. A fighter, a blessing, and I suppose she was. But nobody ever asked what it felt like to be the healthy child in the shadow of a miracle. When you're a kid, you don't understand neglect. You just think love is something that has to be earned. So I tried. I drew pictures for my mom when she came home from the hospital, hoping she'd smile. I waited by the window for my dad to come back from work, thinking maybe he'd bring me a chocolate bar or ask about my day. But they were always too tired, too distracted, too focused on making sure Lily got through another night. There's this one memory that never leaves me. I was 7, and my school had a little music show. We made invitations for our families, carefully cutting and gluing bits of colored paper. I remember writing to Mom and Dad in my best handwriting, decorating it with tiny stars. I left it on the kitchen table before going to bed, excited for them to see it. The next morning, I found it in the trash, coffee stains on the corner. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. I didn't even cry right away. I think I was just confused. Why throw away something that was made for them? When my mom came into the kitchen, she looked irritated that I was standing there. "Why are you crying, Sara? You know your sister has an appointment today. Don't start." That was the first time I realized crying didn't get me comfort. It just got me silence. Over the years, I learned to stop expecting. On birthdays, there'd be cake for both of us, but the bigger slice always went to Lily. On Christmas, her gifts would spill across the living room, shiny and loud, while mine were small and practical. A pair of socks, maybe a notebook. My parents didn't mean to be cruel. They were just consumed by survival, and I guess in a way, so was I. When I turned 12, I started drawing. I didn't have fancy art supplies, just pencils and an old sketchbook from the dollar store. But it became my escape, my way of speaking when no one was listening. I drew my feelings, my loneliness, my imaginary worlds where people actually looked at me when I entered a room. The first time my teacher noticed, she called me after class. "Sara," she said softly, holding my sketchbook open. "You have a gift." No one had ever said that to me before. That small moment changed everything. It was like she handed me a key to a door I didn't know existed. Through art, I started building a version of myself that felt real, one who didn't have to fight for attention or approval, and slowly, the walls I'd built around my heart began to crack, just enough to let a little light in. When I entered high school, I was used to keeping to myself. I didn't talk much, didn't try to join groups. People knew me as the quiet girl who always had graphite smudges on her fingers. That was fine by me, until I met Ethan. He was nothing like anyone I'd ever known. Loud but kind, confident without being cruel. The first time he spoke to me, I was sitting under a tree sketching between classes. He leaned over my shoulder and said, "That's incredible. Did you draw that?" I remember my cheeks burning. Nobody had ever sounded so genuinely amazed. I just nodded. He smiled. This easy, warm smile that made me feel seen. From then on, Ethan became part of my life in ways I didn't expect. We started eating lunch together, walking home sometimes when our schedules lined up. He'd tell me about his family, how his mom loved to cook, how his dad worked from home and always made bad jokes. They sounded like the kind of family I saw in movies, the kind that sat down for dinner together and actually talked. I didn't say much about my own home life. I didn't know how to explain that love in my house was something rationed like medicine. When Ethan invited me over for the first time, I almost said no. But something in me wanted to see what it was like, to step into the world he described. His house was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of cinnamon. His mom hugged me like I was already part of the family, and his dad insisted I call him Mr. J. There was no tension, no careful walking on eggshells. I remember watching them joke with each other over dinner, everyone talking at once, and realizing how foreign that was to me. That night, when I got home, the house was dark. My parents were still at the hospital with Lily. A note on the fridge said, "Dinner's in the microwave." I heated it up and ate in silence, staring at the clock, wishing I could freeze time and go back to Ethan's dining table where I felt like I belonged. Over time, his family became my safe place. I didn't plan it, but it happened naturally. His mom, Karen, would ask about school, about art, about things my own parents never had time to ask. She'd come to school events when Ethan performed in band, and sometimes she'd bring an extra seat just for me. Once, after one of my art exhibitions at school, she told me, "Sara, you're going to do something amazing with this talent. You know that, right?" I smiled, but inside I wanted to cry. Nobody had ever said something like that to me. Not even my teachers, not my parents, not anyone. That's when I realized something painful but true. Sometimes, the family you find can love you better than the family you're born into. Still, I didn't tell my parents much about Ethan or his family. It wasn't that I was hiding it, it just felt pointless. They rarely asked about my day, and when they did, it was out of obligation, not curiosity. My dad would nod absently, scrolling through his phone while I spoke. My mom would say, "That's nice, honey," before turning back to Lily's needs. I could have told them I won the lottery, and they probably would have said, "That's nice, dear." But everything changed the day my school nominated me for an art competition. My teacher submitted one of my sketches without telling me. A portrait I'd done of a woman standing in the rain, her face half hidden, her eyes defiant. The piece was called Unseen. When I found out it had been selected for the regional finals, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For the first time in my life, something that was mine, something I created, was being recognized. Ethan was over the moon when I told him. His parents were too. They insisted they'd come to the award presentation if I made it that far. "You've got a whole cheer squad now," his dad joked. I laughed, but it hit me how badly I'd wanted someone to say that. When I told my parents, their reaction was lukewarm. My mom said, "That's good, Sara, but don't get your hopes up too much, okay? You know how these things go." That one sentence took the wind out of me. I stopped talking about it after that. Weeks later, I found out I'd won first place. My teacher was so proud she almost cried. "You did it, Sara," she said, hugging me. The award ceremony was scheduled for the following Friday at my school, and I decided right then that I didn't want to tell my family. I didn't want to risk their indifference ruining what should have been a happy moment. Instead, I told Ethan and his parents. They promised to be there, and I believed them. On the day of the ceremony, I woke up nervous but excited. It felt like my heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I wore the nicest dress I had, a simple pale blue one that I'd saved from last summer. When I looked in the mirror for once, I saw someone who wasn't invisible. At school, the auditorium buzzed with chatter. My classmates filled the seats, teachers smiled, and when my name was called, I walked onto that stage and accepted the award with shaking hands. I glanced toward the crowd and saw Ethan and his parents in the front row, clapping, smiling, eyes full of pride. My chest tightened with warmth, and then I saw them. My parents, my grandparents, sitting near the back, their expressions unreadable. I froze for half a second, my smile faltering. I hadn't told them about the ceremony. How did they even know? My gaze flicked between them and Ethan's parents, and something deep inside me twisted. But I didn't walk over to them. Not this time. For once, I wanted to be celebrated by people who had chosen to show up for me. When the ceremony ended, I hugged Ethan, then his mom, then his dad. I heard them telling me how proud they were, and it felt like everything I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. We took pictures, laughed, and went out for dinner. It was the best night of my life. For a few hours, I felt like I belonged somewhere. My grandmother huffed, muttering something under her breath. My mom just nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. Maybe we can try again. But I wasn't sure what again meant. You can't rebuild something that never existed. After they left, I went to my room and called Ethan. I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds, I said quietly. One that never saw me, and one that finally does. He replied softly, then walk toward the one that sees you. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. My parents might never be the kind of people who understood me, but I didn't have to keep waiting for them to change. I could build my own version of family, one made of love freely given, not guilt demanded. And for the first time, that thought didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. But freedom, I was about to learn, often comes with a price. And my parents weren't ready to let go just yet. The next morning, the house was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, the heavy kind that settles after a storm, where every sound feels wrong, and even the air seems to hold its breath. I didn't go down for breakfast. I stayed in my room, sitting cross-legged on my bed, staring at the award plaque on my desk. The sunlight hit the gold letters, making them glow, and for a moment I felt proud again. Then the guilt crept in. That familiar, suffocating guilt that always followed when I dared to stand up for myself. Was I too harsh last night? Maybe, but wasn't I allowed to be angry? A knock on the door made me jump. It was my mother. "Sara, can we talk?" she said, her voice soft but strained. I hesitated before opening the door. She stepped inside, still in her bathrobe, her hair tied up hastily. She looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from years of avoiding things that hurt. "I didn't know you didn't want us there," she began quietly. "We found out about the ceremony from your school's Facebook page. I thought maybe it would be nice to surprise you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think it was a genuine effort. But the way she said it, the way she sounded more hurt by my reaction than by all the years she hadn't shown up, made my chest tighten. "I didn't tell you because I didn't think you'd come," I said. My voice was barely above a whisper. "You never come to my things." Her lips pressed together. "That's not fair, Sara. You know how much we've had to manage with your sister." "There it is," I interrupted bitterly. "It always comes back to Lily." Her eyes flashed with hurt. "She's your sister. She's been sick all her life. You've always had it easier." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was such a predictable answer. "Easier? You think being invisible is easy? You think it's easy watching everyone celebrate her birthdays like a national holiday while mine gets a store-bought cake and a, 'sorry, we're busy'? You think it's easy sitting alone at every school event because nobody ever comes for you?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Sara, please, I'm not trying to take anything away from Lily," I said, my voice shaking. "But I deserve love too. I deserve to feel like I matter." For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue. Then she sighed, defeated. "You'll understand one day," she murmured. "When you're older. When you're a mother." She turned and left, closing the door behind her. And just like that, the silence returned. Heavier this time because it carried all the words we didn't say. I sat there, trembling, trying not to cry again. But I couldn't help it. I'd spent years building walls around my feelings, but the cracks were too deep now. Everything I'd buried was spilling out. That weekend, I barely left my room. My grandparents didn't come over, but my dad tried to talk to me once. It was short and awkward. "I think your mother's upset," he said, standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets. "I think I am too," I replied. He sighed. "You could have just said thank you, you know. For them showing up. Thank you for what? For doing the bare minimum after 17 years? He didn't answer. Just shook his head and walked away. I thought maybe he'd understand. But he didn't. None of them did. The next week at school, I tried to focus on classes, but I couldn't stop replaying that night. The memory of my parents' faces, the shock, the disappointment, kept flashing in my mind. I hated that I still cared about how they felt. Ethan noticed right away. He always did. "You've been quiet," he said one afternoon as we sat by the art room window. I shrugged. Things are weird at home. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Because of the ceremony? Yeah, they showed up and I didn't acknowledge them. Then they got mad. Did they ever tell you they were coming? No, he frowned. Then they don't really have the right to be angry. I smiled weakly. You sound like my therapist, he grinned. Guess I missed my calling. I laughed, and for a moment the weight lifted. Ethan had that effect on me, like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a small room. That evening, when I went over to his house for dinner, his mom, Karen, greeted me with a hug as usual. But she paused when she saw my face. Rough day? I hesitated, then nodded. Just family stuff. She didn't pry. She just said, you don't have to talk about it, but you do have to eat. The table was set with homemade lasagna, garlic bread, and salad. The smell alone made my stomach growl. As we ate, I watched how easily everyone talked. Ethan teasing his dad, his mom laughing, even their dog barking excitedly under the table. It was chaos, but the good kind, the kind that fills a home with warmth. I realized I hadn't felt that in years. After dinner, Karen pulled me aside. You know, she said, lowering her voice, we're really proud of you, Sara. That award wasn't just for your art, it was for your heart too. I blinked back tears. Thank you. That means a lot, she smiled. You deserve to be celebrated. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise. Those words stuck with me. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how strange it was that kindness could hurt. Not because it was painful, but because it showed you everything you'd been missing. The following week, things at home got worse. My parents stopped talking to me unless necessary. My mom was polite but distant, and my dad seemed annoyed whenever I spoke. Even Lily noticed. One night, she came into my room, her small frame silhouetted by the hallway light. Mom and Dad are mad at you, she said softly. I know. Why? I looked at her. Because I said something they didn't want to hear. She tilted her head. You always say things people don't want to hear. I almost smiled. Maybe, then she frowned. They still love you, you know, do they? I asked quietly. She didn't answer. After a moment, she left, and I was alone again. A few days later, my mom asked me to go with her to the grocery store. It was the first time she'd spoken to me normally in weeks. The car ride was silent at first, the radio playing faintly. Then she said, Your grandparents think you owe them an apology. I turned to her. For what? For embarrassing them. They felt disrespected. I almost laughed. They never came to anything before. They can't be embarrassed for missing 100 things, but they can be embarrassed for showing up once. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. You're being cruel, Sara. I'm being honest. Sometimes honesty isn't kind, and sometimes kindness isn't honest. I shot back. We didn't speak the rest of the drive. That night, I told Ethan what happened. He listened quietly, his eyes dark with empathy. When I finished, he said, You're not wrong, Sara, but they'll never admit that. They've built their lives around guilt, theirs and yours. If you stop feeling guilty, their story falls apart. His words hit hard. Maybe that's why my parents needed me to feel bad, because it made their neglect easier to justify. The next weekend, Karen invited me to help with a charity art event she was organizing at the community center. It was for kids with medical conditions, painting, crafts, and simple creative fun. I hesitated at first. The idea of being around sick children made me nervous. It reminded me too much of Lily's world, hospitals, medicine, fragility. But when I got there, something changed. The kids weren't sad or weak. They were laughing, messy, covered in paint. They were alive. One little girl with oxygen tubes running to her nose handed me a drawing of a house and said, That's me and my mom. We're happy. It broke me in the best way. For the first time, I saw what my parents must have seen all those years. The fear of losing a child, the desperate need to protect her. But what I couldn't forgive was how they let that fear erase me. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in months. I understand why they love her more. I just wish understanding made it hurt less. As the weeks passed, my relationship with my parents stayed strained. But I began to change. I started entering more art competitions, encouraged by my teacher and Ethan's family. My confidence grew. My world expanded. Still, every time I walked through my front door, it shrank again. Then one evening, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "I'm worried about her," my mom said quietly. "She's fine," my dad replied. "She's just going through a phase. She spends more time with that boy's family than with us. Maybe because we can't give her what they can," he said bitterly. My mom sighed. "You think I don't feel guilty? I do. But she doesn't understand what it's like to live in constant fear for one child's life." My father's voice softened. "Then tell her that. Before you lose her completely." I stepped back from the door, my heart racing. Maybe it was the first time I'd ever heard them acknowledge guilt, but it didn't erase the years of silence. The next day, my mom asked me to come downstairs after dinner. My grandparents were there too, sitting stiffly on the couch. I braced myself. My grandmother spoke first. "Sara, we think it's time you apologize for what you said." I stared at her. "Apologize for telling the truth?" Her lips tightened. "For being disrespectful." I looked at my mother. "Do you agree with that?" She hesitated. "I think we all made mistakes." That wasn't an apology, but it was something. I took a deep breath. "I'm not sorry for how I feel, but I'm sorry if it hurt you to hear it. I needed to say it." My grandmother huffed, muttering something under her breath. My mom just nodded slowly. "Thank you," she said. "Maybe we can try again." But I wasn't sure what again meant. You can't rebuild something that never existed. After they left, I went to my room and called Ethan. "I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds," I said quietly. "One that never saw me, and one that finally does." He replied softly, "Then walk toward the one that sees you." That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. My parents might never be the kind of people who understood me, but I didn't have to keep waiting for them to change. I could build my own version of family, one made of love freely given, not guilt demanded. And for the first time, that thought didn't feel lonely. It felt like freedom. But freedom, I was about to learn, often comes with a price. And my parents weren't ready to let go just yet. The morning after that fight, the house felt unnaturally quiet. Sara stayed in her room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her back against the bed. The world outside her window seemed too bright for how heavy her heart felt. She kept replaying last night, her parents' angry faces, her grandparents' disappointed sighs. It all clung to her like smoke. She wasn't sorry for what she said, but the weight of it still hurt. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan's mom. "Hey, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in. You okay? We're proud of you, for the award and for standing up for yourself." Sara smiled faintly, blinking away tears. Those few kind words felt like medicine. Someone actually saw her. Not as the forgotten daughter, not as a jealous sister, but as Sara, the girl who had worked hard, who had talent, who mattered. When she finally went downstairs, her mom was in the kitchen, silent, sipping coffee. The smell of toast filled the air, but it didn't feel like breakfast. It felt like a storm waiting to break again. Her dad sat at the table, scrolling through his phone. Her grandparents had already gone home. Sara poured herself some water and leaned against the counter. Her mom didn't look up. "You embarrassed us last night," she said quietly. Sara took a breath. "I didn't embarrass anyone. I just told the truth." Her father looked up. "You told your grandparents they weren't invited to see you." "That's cruel, Sara. Cruel?" She laughed softly, though her voice trembled. "Do you know how many times I invited you to something and you never showed up? Do you know how many birthdays I spent watching you celebrate her instead of me? I didn't ignore you to hurt you. I just stopped expecting you to care." Her mother's hand froze around her mug. "You think we didn't care?" "I think you cared more about how it looked when I ignored you," Sara said, "than you ever cared about how I felt growing up." Her dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sara, your sister needed us." "You know that." "I know," she whispered. I always knew. I never blamed her. But I was your kid too. The silence stretched, uncomfortable but honest. Her mom looked down, blinking fast. Her father didn't say anything else. Sara didn't wait for an apology. She knew better than to expect one. She just grabbed her bag and said quietly, "I'm going to Ethan's." And then she left. Ethan's house felt like sunlight. His mom opened the door before Sara even knocked twice. "Come in, honey," she said warmly, pulling her into a hug. The smell of pancakes hit her immediately. Ethan's dad waved from the kitchen. "We made breakfast to celebrate our award-winning artist." Sara laughed weakly. "You really didn't have to." "But we wanted to," his mom said with a smile. "That's what family does. Family." The word made her chest ache in a new way, not from pain, but from longing. As they all sat around the table, Ethan reached across and took her hand. His touch was warm, steady. "You okay?" he asked softly. Sara nodded. "Getting there," he smiled. "You don't have to rush it, just take your time." In the days that followed, Sara poured herself into her art. She started working on a new painting, one that showed 2 trees, one small and shaded, one tall and blooming beside it. She didn't know why she chose that image, but the more she painted, the more she realized it was her way of healing, showing how she had grown despite being overshadowed for years. Her art teacher noticed. "Sara," she said one afternoon, "this piece feels freer, lighter, like you've let something go." Sara smiled. "Maybe I have." A week later, her mom showed up at school unexpectedly. Sara froze when she saw her standing by the gate, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Sara," her mom said quietly. "Can we talk?" Sara hesitated, but nodded. They walked to a nearby bench. Her mom looked nervous, her eyes softer than Sara had seen in years. "I found something," she said. "An old drawing. You made it in 1st grade, a picture of our family. You drew yourself holding a microphone, and all of us sitting in chairs watching you. I realized we never gave you that." Sara's chest tightened. Her mom swallowed hard. "I can't change the past, but I want to try, even if it's late. I'm proud of you, Sara. It wasn't a grand apology. It didn't erase the hurt, but it was something." Sara took the flowers and said quietly, "Thank you." That night, she sat at her desk staring at the 2 trees painting. The smaller one no longer looked lonely. It looked protected. The taller one, once shading it, now leaned slightly toward it, like a gesture of understanding. Maybe that's what healing really looked like. Not forgetting, not pretending the pain didn't happen, but learning to grow with it. A few months later, graduation came. Sara's artwork was displayed at the entrance. The 2 trees painting had won another local award. She looked out at the small crowd gathered for the ceremony. Her parents were there, standing quietly together. Her sister sat in a wheelchair beside them, clapping her small hands when Sara's name was called. And right behind them, Ethan's family stood too, smiling proudly. As Sara stepped up to receive her certificate, she felt tears sting her eyes. Not because everything was perfect now. It wasn't. But because for the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She looked at her parents, at Ethan's mom, at the crowd, and whispered to herself, "I made it." When she stepped down, Ethan met her halfway, wrapping his arms around her. "Told you," he murmured with a grin. "You're unstoppable," Sara laughed softly. "Not unstoppable," she said, "just finally seen." That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sara stood on her porch, a gentle wind brushing her hair. Her sister was inside, laughing with their mom. Her dad was helping her paint tiny stars on her bedroom wall. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Sara closed her eyes and smiled. She didn't need to fight for attention anymore. She didn't need to beg to be loved. She had found her peace, not in revenge or anger, but in art, in love, and in the quiet realization that her worth had never depended on who noticed it.